Hello and welcome to another exciting session of learning provided by Quicksoft. You can contact us for any training needs or doubts you have by sending your email at contact@quicksoft.com. In today's session, we are going to cover supplier creation in Oracle Fusion. Those who are familiar with eBusiness Suite understand the process of supplier creation very well, but there are certain unique checks and balances introduced in Oracle Fusion which we'll show you in this video. So let's start. Before we can create a supplier in Oracle Fusion, we must meet some of the prerequisites required which will enable us to create a supplier. You must be an employee before you can create a supplier. If you are defined as a consultant and your employee is not linked with your user, you will not have access to create a supplier. You must have supplier manager role. This role allows you to have access to create supplier. If you don't have this role, you will not have access to create supplier menu option. You must be defined as a procurement agent in order to define any supplier site for that BU. If you are not defined as a procurement agent for that BU, you will not be seeing the option to create new sites. And you should have approval engine configured for supplier creation approval. And whenever you create any supplier, it goes through the approval engine which you can configure as per your need. It requires approval. Only after approval your supplier creation will be successful. I will go through each and every prerequisite to show you how to configure that. And once you reach the supplier creation stage, it has three components: supplier, addresses and sites. We'll go through that in detail when we reach that stage. Let's start with the first prerequisite, employee. In Oracle Fusion, a users can be created primarily in two ways. One is you go to Security Console and create a user directly. This is generally done for consultant or ad hoc users who are not an employee. Other option is you go to HR module and define an employee. When you create an employee in HR module, Oracle Fusion will automatically create that employee as a user in Security Console, and that user ID will be automatically linked as with the employee person ID. By doing so, you will have a user which is an employee, and employee will have his user ID automatically created. This is the must-have prerequisite, otherwise supplier creation is not allowed. I'll show you a user which I have created, which is an employee. I will go to Security Console to show you how this user is linked to a person. I search for the user and I click on a user name. You notice this is a user which I have created, and this user will be linked with a person. This is the person number. So that means this user was created via employee master. If you have defined a other user without going through employee master, let me show you what is the difference in that. For this user, I did not go through employee master. I came here and created the user directly. Let me. You notice the information here is very different. There is no person details in this user, even though I can assign all the responsibilities. But this user will not be able to create a supplier. Another important role which is missing here is a role employee. Let me show you the previous user. Employee role. This role allows you to get some default access based on for which every employee gets. For example, you can submit expense reports, etc. So this is very crucial setup in order for you to be able to create a supplier. The next important thing for supplier creation is you should have a role called supplier manager role. Let me show you that. For the same user which we have, let me inquire the user. You will notice this user has supplier manager role. Without this role, you will not be allowed to create a supplier. So now we have a user who is an employee. We have assigned supplier manager role to the user. So in order to create supplier site, that same user should have procurement agent role as well. Generally, if you look at it, maybe in organization, all these roles will be assigned to different persons, but because I just want to show you a demo of this transaction, I'm assigning all the roles to the same person. But in real life, the different roles could be assigned to different people. Okay, so now let me show you how to define procurement agent. I'm in my implementation project and I searched for agent and I found this task called manage procurement agents. I go to this task. I can inquire my procurement BU. I have this task. I can click on edit just to show you what I have defined. Yeah. So I chose procurement BU. I chose the agent, and I said default requisition BU is same in my example. And these are a tasks which are allowed for this person to do. Access to other agents or documents, whether or not you can choose in this as required. So very basic simple setup, but if you don't have this setup done for the user, you will not be able to create supplier site. If you remember, those who are familiar with e-business suite, unless you define an employee as a buyer, you were not allowed to create a purchase orders. But in Fusion, they have enhanced the security by that you cannot even create a site unless you are a procurement agent. So we have defined a procurement agent also now. And the last step is configuring the approval engine, without which the supplier will not be approved. Let me show you which approval process you need to configure. We are now at Business Process Manager worklist, which shows all the approval flows configured in the system. I search for star, supplier star, and I see this list. I believe all of you are familiar how to come to this list. I've shown in my previous videos how to come to this list. If anyone not sure, always send me a comment. I will show you step by step again. So there are few supplier approval process flows. We will not go through all, but I will just show you few which are important. Spend authorization approval, supplier external registration approval, supplier internal registration approval. Before we understand all this approval flow modification, let me share with you some documentation so that you get better clarity what is external supplier, what is internal supplier, and what is spend authorization. Here I am going through a standard Oracle documentation which you can always access from this link. I'll walk you through some key important points which you should understand. Now, the supplier registration process is used by companies and internal user on their behalf to submit their registration request to become a supplier for the buying organization. So supplier can request themselves through supplier portal, or an internal employee can submit the request to create a supplier. Supplier can potentially enter into a business relationship with the buying organization through external supplier registration or internal supplier registration. As I mentioned, external and internal here. Internal supplier registration allows employees to request new supplier through sourcing, supplier work area, and through self-service procurement. So suppliers can request themselves, or internal employees, depending upon their business need, can request registration of a new supplier. Very important point, regardless of how a supplier is introduced, externally or internally, the buying organization reviews the registration request using a collaborative review process and determines if it wants to consider this company as a new source of supply or not. Remember, I showed you the BPM approval flows, internal and external. Regardless how it is coming, externally or internally, it will go through relevant approval process, and only after approval the supplier will be registered in the system. Now let us understand supplier registration flow. The buying organization makes a supplier registration URL available to potential suppliers. You can find the registration URL for each business relationship type on Configure Procurement Business Function page. I'll show you this page. I'm on my implementation project and I'm at a task Configure Procurement Business Function. At any stage when you come to your project and you don't find a task, you can always go to Action, select and add, because by default not every task is added. If you need, you can always go to Action, select and add the task. In my case also I couldn't find a task, so I went to my Action, select and added this task, Configure Procurement Business Function. Let me open the task. So ask for BU, I say OK. Now this is the Configure procurement business function. I will not go into detail of what all setup needs to be done here. I just want to show you something which we saw in the documentation. Prospective supplier registration URL, spend authorized supplier registration URL. These are the URL which we will need to be which we have to give to suppliers so that they can go to this URL and submit their request. What is a prospective supplier and what is spend authorized supplier? We'll be covering it at a later stage when we start creating a supplier. So basically the buying organization finds the URL in this configure procurement business function page and gives it to a supplier. The potential supplier or the internal user enters all required information and submits a registration request. The suppliers can save their in-process registration if they need to gather requested information and return to submit the registration later. On that configure procurement business function, the link which I give to supplier, on that link they have certain things to do. They can submit the request or they can save it. I'll be going to show you that function as well. So we will be creating a supplier using that function so you understand how an external request is submitted. The potential supplier or the internal user enter the information. The buying organization receives a registration request. Yeah, this is where the approval process gets triggered, which goes through a collaborative review process. The approval management services facilitates the approval routing of the registration. In setup and maintenance procurement offering, use the following tasks to maintain registration approval rules. Manage supplier registration approval, manage internal supplier registration approvals. Remember, these are a few supplier registration approvals I had shown in the BPM. Supplier internal registration approval, spend authorized approval, supplier external registration approval. Yeah, so later stage we're going to cover all this. Yeah, at this stage I just want to show you what is available and where. We'll be covering step by step and in detail when we reach that stage. So during the review process, the company name, information, tax identity, everything is verified before a supplier is created to avoid any duplicate suppliers from being created. Yeah, so this is a typical checks and balances process. Approvers who have the required privileges can edit the registration during approval. So depending upon the privileges you have, so when you are approving, if you find some issues in the data, you have actually access to modify and submit it through. The default approvals for spend authorized suppliers are defined in the procurement agent tables in manage supplier function for each procurement BU. Yeah, let me show you that. This was the procurement agent I had defined. So these are the privileges he has. He also has a managed supplier, which means this person will be allowed to approve supplier registration as mentioned in the documentation. So the actions approver can take is approver can approve or reject, or approver can request can also be sent to resubmission if needed, or any additional information which could be required. The outcome of the review either approved or rejected. An email notification with the registration request outcome is sent to the user who submitted the supplier registration request and any contacts marked as administrative contacts on the registration. What happens if it is approved? Automatically starts a process to create a supplier record from the registration. If user accounts were requested for contacts on the registration, then user provisioning requests are also sent to the identity management system for processing. If a prospective supplier is approved, then that supplier is available for transactions on sourcing and qualification. If a spend authorized supplier is approved, then a spend authorized approval request is raised. If it is rejected, reject the request and send notification to the requester. Yeah, so in this basically you understand the basic supplier registration flows and the avenues through which a supplier can be registered. This has been summarized very nicely on this picture as well. Basically, supplier action can be performed by procurement application administrator, potential supplier, supplier administrator, internal user, supplier administrator, or procurement requester. These all can trigger a supplier creation request. Yeah, so procurement administrator can configure registration setup and publish supplier registration URL. Potential supplier can enter required information and submit registration request. Supplier administrator will review information and make changes if necessary and submit for approval, and once approved all the necessary setup will be completed. Internal user can submit a registration through sourcing event, supplier administrator or procurement requester, supplier invited from sourcing negotiation or submitted as part of a purchase request. So this is a supplier registration process and flow, and you understand different avenues from where supplier creation requests can be submitted. A supplier creation request can have many components, but I will just focus on main three, which is supplier, supplier addresses and supplier sites. Once you understand this, the rest of the components are very easy to understand. Let me show you an example so that you get a better clarity of what these three main components are and what is the purpose behind it. In this example, I have shown you a supplier, three different addresses and sites. Yeah. So the key thing to understand is the scope of each component. A supplier is global, which means if I define a supplier that is defined at a system level, any business unit, anybody who uses the system, anybody can use it, any business organization can use it. Addresses are also global, anybody can use it. But before any business unit decides to use a supplier or its address, they have to connect it to their site, connect it to their business unit and define a site under that address. Yeah. So three components: supplier, supplier address and supplier site. So once you define a supplier, every business unit will be able to see that supplier exists. For example, IBM is defined in business unit 1. When business unit 2 wants to use it, they will be able to see that there is an existing supplier called IBM. Similarly, they will be able to see all the addresses defined when the supplier was first time defined for business unit 1. They can see all this, but then when they decide to use that particular supplier for their own business unit, then they can think which address they want to use all or which one. Then they define a site under that address for their business unit. For all the transaction which you do in the system, you will need a supplier and it is site which is linked to your business unit. If a site is not defined for your business unit for that supplier, then you will not be able to use that supplier for transactions under that business unit. Yeah. So remember the scope: supplier and addresses are global and site is specific to your business unit. What are these different addresses? We all understand supplier is an organization. An organization can have different addresses from where they provide services. For example, in this case I have headquarters at East Singapore, West Singapore. There are three offices or different, you can also call addresses and locations, three different locations in Singapore. And what is the business purpose of that address? Supplier may classify that what is the purpose of the different offices. The classification for all three offices could be same, or multiple offices could be same or could be different. For example, here supplier is saying for HQ is primarily I deal for RFQs. For my address 2 I deal for purchasing and payments, receive payments, and for address 3 you can send the same as purchasing and payments. Yeah, this is the business purpose of the supplier address. Now, what is the BU and supplier relationship? We define with the site that this site can use this address to do what. That's where the BU's business purpose comes into picture. We say this site business unit 1 will use for sourcing, and then we define a site under address 2 which is for purchasing and payment, and address 3 also purchasing and payment. That means I can do send purchase orders and payments to this address. I can also send purchase order and payment to this address, but for this address I can only do sourcing for negotiation and quotations. Yeah, so this is a very brief overview of the key components in supplier. There are many other components in supplier which I will show you shortly, but once you understand these three, then you will have a good understanding of how supplier process works. Now let me show you some other components which are defined in a documentation. Later when we do supplier creation, we will see all these components in action also. A supplier creation request will contain organization detail, like basic details about supplier, his tax detail and all that, tax registration number, and what are the contacts for supplier, and for which contact you want to create a user account. Supplier addresses, as I mentioned in my example. Business classification, yeah, capture the certification details, applicable supplier diversity exam, whatever classification of the business. Bank accounts, very important. what are the accounts which supplier has. This will be useful when we want to make electronic payment to the supplier. Yeah, and product and services supplier provides, and any additional questionnaire which we want to receive when supplier is registering its request. I believe with this small example and documentation, it helped you understand what are the different components for supplier, supplier addresses, supplier sites, and also various steps a supplier registration goes through. I've seen many other training videos available on internet, but they just go directly on supplier creation screen without explaining all these components which are important. Because if you just see that supplier creation process and you go in the system, try to create the supplier, you will struggle for many days and you will not be successful in creating a supplier. At the same time, your understanding of supplier will be very raw. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to give you as much information as I know, so that you get a better understanding and appreciation of supplier creation process. And then when you go and create in the system, once you do see those things in front of you, you will have better understanding and appreciation. Yeah. So now the components we have understood, prerequisites we have understood and defined. Now let us create a supplier externally and then internally and understand the whole process end to end. To define an external supplier, remember I had showed you that business unit finds the links and provides the links to the supplier so that they can submit the request. For that we need to go to configure procurement business function. I go to this function again. And this is the URL for prospective supplier and spend authorized supplier. Let me quickly explain to you what is prospective and spend authorized. Prospective suppliers are those with whom we do the negotiation. We basically do the sourcing, initial sourcing discussion and negotiations with them. But once a supplier is confirmed that we are going to buy from the supplier, then we convert a prospect to a spend authorized supplier. And you can create purchase orders only to spend authorized suppliers, and at each stage it will require approvals. So let me show you both processes. We will copy this link, and then I'll go to another browser session so that there is no clash between this browser session. And you can see this is a totally new request. This is the URL for suppliers. There is no sign in so far, none here. So I can give the details. Let me enter all the details. So I have entered the company details, company name, tax organization type, you can choose it as needed. Supply type, again you can choose as needed. Company website, only star columns you need to fill, but I'm just filling those which are needed. And you can choose tax country, tax registration number, and also the contact information of the supplier. I've given my name here. Once you're done here, then go to next. You will see whatever contact information you're given is by default listed here. Yeah, you can edit it, or you can actually create more contacts as needed. But this is defined as administrative contact, and we have also requested user account. If you want to edit, you can click on edit. Yeah, then you can specify whatever information required. Maybe salutation we can here. Anything else important? Job title I can say director. Any phone numbers you can give, and we have tick request user account. In all these three rules will be attached to this user when the user is created automatically. You can add or remove more as needed. Yeah, these are a bare minimum required to be able to do the job. Okay, so click OK. Then if you want to add more contact, you can, otherwise just go to next step. Now supplier addresses. Remember I told you about multiple addresses which are global. We need to define address for the supplier. I defined address detail. I given a name to the address and given the address details. Now very important, address purpose. As I mentioned in my example earlier, what is the purpose of the business having this additional address? It can be all, it can be few, up to you. Ordering, receiving payment, RFQ bidding. Maybe I can click all these three. Then if you want to maintain address specific contact, you can do that here. Otherwise click on OK. Okay, now we go to the next stage, which is business classification. In this section, supplier can maintain any classification or certification they have from different authorities, but we'll skip this section for this example. And then any bank account supplier has, you can mention your bank account details as needed, and you can maintain multiple bank accounts, but in this example I will just maintain one. Now if you want to maintain what kind of services the supplier provides, you can maintain it here, but for this example we can just skip it. Click on next. This is a review page of all the information you have entered. If you find anything you want to update, you can go back and update it. As we have seen in the documentation, you can save it for update later, or you can actually submit for registration. I'll click on register. Your registration requests are submitted. You will receive an email after your registration request is reviewed. So what we have done is we went to configure procurement business function. We picked this URL for prospective supplier registration and then send it to supplier, and supplier has registered the request using that URL. A similar request can be submitted through spend authorization URL, and supplier can submit the request from spend authorization, and then necessary action will be taken, same as prospective supplier. Remember, I had shown that this particular user has a managed supplier access already given in the procurement agent. So this user has received a request from supplier as a notification. Let's see what's the notification all about. Action required, supplier registration request for Quicksoft Singapore Limited. So this is the notification which this person has received. He or she can see details, and it also shows something called warning, review the supplier match results. It is saying that similar name matches 50% score because supplier name called Quicksoft Private Limited is already there. So do you want to continue, or you want to see maybe it's the same company which you are trying to register? This is done to avoid duplication. This says potential matches. So the reviewer must always look at it before approving. Let's say we could say this is a different company. We continue and go ahead with this thing. So the reviewer sees all the details given here. And then any attachment if has been added will be seen here. And this is the approval chain built by a system based on the approval rules. So first stage approval, second stage approval. First stage approval is this guy, and then it will go to second stage approval. So let's just approve it. Actions can be all this, but we can always in this example click on approve. After approval, the two emails are sent to the supplier. The email address member had given during my registration. So let's see what kind of emails are received. It says your registration request to be a supplier for enterprise was approved. This is the request number and details. This is first email which was received. Second email says Oracle Fusion application welcome email. The name of the person. Congratulations, your Fusion application request has been created. Please follow the link below to reset your password. So basically they have created a user ID for the administrator, and they can go to this link and reset the password. I'll go to this link later. Let me just open a third email which has been received as well. For your information, supplier contact user account was created. This is a notification because sometimes you may have administrator and multiple user accounts. This is an email which goes to administrator saying that these are the roles given to this user and the user has been created. So now recommended action, you were granted access to supplier application. The username and password of this user will be sent in a separate email which has been sent as shown earlier. So now let's go and try to log in as this user and see what this user gets. Copy this hyperlink. I go here and paste it and say enter. This is the request for a reset password. Let me just reset it. I say welcome one. and it says submit. Now it's asking me to sign in. I have received another email after resetting the password. It says the password for your user account vikas.a.handa was recently changed. So I use this as an account to log in. I know the password I had given. And click on sign in. I don't want to save. This is what the supplier contact administrator receives this as a login detail and automatically assigned responsibilities. At this stage we will not go into too much detail what they can do, what they cannot do, what kind of access they have, but we will now we have created this one. Once we reach in later stage, maybe different videos, we'll go and drill down more into this. I just wanted to show you that how a supplier can register a request as an external user and what will happen once this request is approved, and the contact can get the email of access and then they can start using the system. Yeah, I hope this whole process get understanding of how external supplier can be registered. So we have completed an external supplier registration request and approval request process. Now let us go in the system and see what is the status of supplier in the supplier master now. I will go to manage suppliers. Yeah, I can see there are two organizations. Previously there was Quicksoft Private Limited. Now I have created another one and approved it, Quicksoft Singapore Limited. As you can see the business relationship, the new one is called Prospective because I use the URL for Prospective Supplier Registration. Yeah, let's click on this and inquire. Yeah, you can see the details. You can edit the details as needed. Yeah, but most important thing which we want to do is we want to change it from Prospective to Spend Authorized. But you can choose depending upon your business need what you want to do. Let's change it to under Spend Authorized so that you understand how the Spend Authorized process works. Justification. You can enter justification details for the approver, and at the same time, if you want, you can actually say I want procurement BU to be this. You know what will happen? It will automatically create site for you. So you do not have to go once the Spend Authorized is approved. You do not have to go and create a site manually. This will do that for you automatically. So let's submit this request. The status of the request is now pending approval. System also notifies you that you cannot edit this supplier record now because Spend Authorization request is pending approval. Only the current approver can edit the supplier. Now this is the time when the workflow process in the BPM gets triggered, and this time it will be the triggered process will be Spend Authorization approval. Yeah, the process has been configured for approval. Let me see to whom the approval has been sent. In my approval process, I had just simply defined a static user, the same person Rob Laveri, as the approval. So let me see whether he has received the request for approval. So I go to notifications. Action required, request to approve supplier for spend. Let me click here. Yeah. So this person has received the request. So I will click on approve. Now if I inquire the supplier again, I will notice my second supplier is also Spend Authorized. Yeah, I can click on it. Yeah, and system also sends a notification. Yeah, it says welcome to Vision as a Spend Authorized supplier. Your organization now has access to supplier portal and the ability to transact with Vision. Vision is the name. I think based on system configuration will come. Please review attached FS account and contact us if you have any question. This is standard terms and condition document. Yeah, it's primarily master services document which has been drafted in a system sent to supplier for agreeing. I think you can configure your own and send. System will send a document which you have created. Again, just as a reminder, suppliers can be two types: prospect or a spend authorized. So if it's a prospect, you can only do negotiation with them, but you cannot do any purchase order or payment to them. But once it's confirmed you want to do transaction with them, then you convert it to spend authorized and then you do the necessary process. Yeah. So we have completed external supplier request which was submitted by supplier, and then we went through the approval stage, and finally we saw supplier has been created. Then we converted supplier from prospect to a spend authorized, and it was successfully created. Now I can use that supplier for any transaction I want. Let me show you quickly how the internal request process is done. It's very similar, but I'll just maybe touch the initial point. The rest of the process is exactly the same as external request. Let me show you that. So in order to create a supplier internally, where basically an employee of the company wants a supplier to be registered, he receives whatever request from supplier and wants to create it, submit the request. As an employee, I will log into the system and go to create supplier. Then I'll say so this time when I submit the request, I have directly given spend authorized. Yeah, so I don't have to convert from prospect to spend authorized again. I'll just given directly and I given the details and I click on create. Yeah, system will again, because the initial name matches, will tell you potential matches and show you a warning. Do you want to proceed? So you can either cancel it or you can say ignore match results and create supplier. Once you reach this screen, it's exactly the same process which you have seen earlier. So we'll go through all these setups quickly. Let me fill all the data. You can also enter a parent supplier name. If you know this is a subsidiary of a parent supplier, this will help you consolidate information for your reporting purposes later. So I go to addresses now. Let me add one address. So I given address details, and I've also given site details for the BU which I wanted to attach to. Yeah, so once I'm done, I can say save and close, and then I can click on submit. Let me inquire QuickSoft again. So my spend authorized supplier QuickSoft Malaysia Limited has been created successfully. I can inquire the details. Click on done. So I have shown you the process if you want to submit an supplier creation request internally, how to do it. So in this whole video you understood all key prerequisites of creating a supplier. You understood the components, and then you also finally saw end-to-end process for registration. Yeah, I believe you found this video useful and will be able to do this, follow these steps end to end as shown in the video. Thank you very much for watching this video, and at any point if you have any question or query, please remember to send an email to contact@quicksoft.com, or if you want any specific video or specific scenario, let me know. I will try to publish that video for you if it helps you. Yeah, please remember to subscribe to our channel so you can get notification for all new videos automatically. Thank you very much for your time and happy learning.